and what we're learning about the killer.
This afternoon, we are following the developments on both of those two big stories impacting Utahns.
Our team is on the ground following every angle of this. Now, members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints not only mourning the loss of their prophet, but also a tragic shooting at a meeting house in Michigan.
Police are confirming the 40-year-old suspect is dead.
I think the young people of the church are the finest that have ever been on planet Earth.
President Nelson impacted countless lives across the globe, from those who are members of his faith and those who are not.
Aaron Cox spoke with local faith leaders who shared how President Nelson was respected and loved by those outside of the church. Aaron?
That's right, Ashley and Deanie. Interfaith leaders from across the state say President Nelson was not just a good friend to them. They say that even though they didn't share his same faith or beliefs, they still believe he is a man called of God.
Rabbi Sam Spector for Congregation Kol Ami will never forget having lunch with President Nelson.
A kind and humble man. Here I was with somebody who is the Latter-day Saints prophet, and yet the way he talked and looked at me was as though he saw holiness in me. And that really meant a lot to me.
Rabbi Spector asked President Nelson for advice.
I receive so much criticism that it's very hard sometimes to do this work. What advice do you have for me so that I don't burn out? And President Nelson gave me the simplest and yet most profound advice, which was, remember two things every morning when you wake up. Love your fellow person and love God.
Reverend Franz Davis remembers a time when President Nelson came to him asking for help. President Nelson was preparing for his speech for the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People and asked Reverend Davis to help him write it.
It was the first time ever, regardless of denominations, that anybody had come to me and said, help, I need to make sure that I'm not saying anything that's offensive or inappropriate in the speech that I'm going to give.
May God bless you, one and all.
A historic speech that started with connecting faith.
I'll remember President Nelson for his willingness to open the door by coming to me instead of inviting me to come to him. That was an open door and an opportunity that will always be remembered.
You're talking to a spiritual leader who's revered.
Indra Neelamegam, a practicing Hindu, remembers attending an interfaith ceremony with President Nelson.
When I went to shake President Nelson's hand, I said, I'm very honored to shake your hand, sir. As a special religious leader, I revere you. And then he immediately said, yes, I recognize the Hindus believe in all faith leaders. And I was touched by the fact that he could recognize my background.
Memories of a religious leader to those outside of his faith.
I discovered a man who didn't seem arrogant at all, was very thoughtful, very humble, really showed that he was trying to think about what was best for his community and for his faith.
Now, some of these interfaith leaders have expressed condolences today, and they also have said that they're praying for Latter-day Saints everywhere because of the events that have happened and unfolded, showing President Nelson's ability to unite those not only within his faith, but those outside. Ashley, Deanie, back to you.
Beautiful stories of those interfaith connections. Aaron, great story. Thank you. Appreciate it.
Still ahead. KSL-5 News. Thank you, Carol. Among those remembering their time with President Nelson are those who lived closest to him, his neighbors.
Yeah, and they shared with Aaron Cox that he was the same man, whether it was family, friends, or whoever he was around.
Yeah, that's right, Mike and Deanie. President Nelson lived in the Harvard-Yale area here in Salt Lake City, and his neighbors say they were not just included in the big moments, but the small moments of the Nelson family life.
Steve Rich grew up next door to President Russell Nelson.
My earliest memory is that you had to get up pretty early in the morning if you wanted to shovel your own sidewalk, because President Nelson would do it.
President Nelson served as a stake president when Steve was preparing for his mission.
The interview was, I should say, very comprehensive.
After his mission, Steve moved a door down with his wife, Melinda, where they watched President Nelson receive the call to the Quorum of the 12 Apostles.
He would be practicing talks. He would be saying talks while he was walking and memorizing them. And I thought that was always so cool.
The Riches watched the Nelson's family grow from a family of 9 to 10.
One time I came into the circle, and on the outside of the Nelson's house was this big blue blanket, and they'd had all these girls. And when we saw that blue blanket, we were so thrilled that they had Russell.
They enjoyed Christmas parties and community gatherings.
You know, we would set up a neighborhood party every September and invite all of our neighbors in the circle to come, and it was always just such a pleasure. Danzel was such a fun person. She sang in the choir. She had a beautiful voice. She taught in Relief Society. She was just a loving, warm person. And
it was at one of these neighborhood parties they received the news about Danzel Nelson's passing.
And I remember that as being kind of such a hard time for our ward. We loved that family very much.
Yet when they saw President Nelson on his morning walks, he spoke of joy.
He would talk about his joy in knowing that the resurrection and our life together in the future is real. When he gave talks about that, then it was pretty much the same talk that he gave to me in pieces.
Moments and memories as neighbors of President Nelson.
People would often say to us, what was it like living next to President Nelson? I'd say, it's just exactly the same as he is now. It's not any different.
He has always extended himself for the welfare of his fellow beings and for the gospel and the church.
Now, the Rich family says that President Nelson was also influential to their neighbors in that same neighborhood who were not members of the church, that they were always invited to gatherings and always very involved. Mike, Deanie, back to you.
All of these things you hear about, characteristics of Christ, and that's what he emulated, and everyone will tell you that. It's just so powerful to hear these backstories. Thank you, Aaron.
Next, the passing of a...
You're watching KSL News at 10.
Welcome back. We continue our coverage of the passing of President Russell M. Nelson, President of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. President Nelson met with journalists really from all around the world many a times, but he still always made time for some of the young journalists just starting out in the biz.
As in, news specialist Aaron Cox. Aaron, you met President Nelson before he was prophet.
That's right, Deanie and Mike. I interviewed with President Nelson the September before he became prophet, which was 8 years ago. At the time, I was a student journalist with Utah State University, and you can see in these pictures here, he asked his wife, Wendy, to sit behind me and to sit behind the camera so he could look at her during the interview, and even saying to me during our mic check, he always treated me like a professional, even though I was a student at the time. We spoke of many topics that night, but the one that stood out to me the most was when I asked him what it meant to him to bear the title of special witness. This is what he said.
A witness is a person who has knowledge. A special witness has special knowledge. And so when one of us, as special witnesses of the Lord, says we know that God lives, and we know that Jesus is the Christ, and we know the gospel is restored in these latter days through the prophet Joseph Smith, we know that because we have special knowledge, some of which has been obtained in temples, in sacred places, and we don't speak in detail about that, but take my word for it. We know what we're saying. It is true. Thank you.
And that was the end of our interview. He was 93 years old at the time, and he was absolutely bright and brilliant. He was very articulate with his word choice. Every question I had, he had a quick answer for it that was so thoughtful. It was an interview experience I will never forget. Mike and Dini, back to you.
Oh, I can imagine you wouldn't.
Oh,
Aaron,
yeah.
thank you. What a great experience.
Yeah, pretty special. Hey, stick around. We'll be right back.